And this is I would say, kind of a bittersweet week. I mean, as we get ready to say goodbye to the Horns, I think, are ready to say bye to us. And I was talking about the Baylor as a Baylor alum. So it's a weird week, but an exciting week. And unfortunately, the Horns catch the Bears at a very vulnerable time. And so I continue each day to try to talk myself into maybe there's a way, maybe there's some sort of angle here, and I'm really having trouble, guys. So I'll do my best, though, to provide you any information you might need on the 2023 Baylor Bears.
Well, let's start with the offense. Blake Shapen goes down. Sawyer Robertson comes in from the transfer portal from Mississippi State. Looks like he's struggling a bit, Mosley, to get things going. But you've got the running game, Richard Reese. Kind of size up what you like, what you don't like about the Baylor offense.
Well, they brought in a transfer from Oklahoma State, Dominic Richardson, and he has really been one of the few highlights of the season. Unfortunately, he has a high ankle sprain. Reese is fast, good back, and they unveiled a youngster named Dawson Pendergrass against the LIU folks who came into town, the Sharks, recently named team, by the way. I think they changed their name after several years there. And Pendergrass ran with he really was getting 4 or 5 yards after contact. Again, I don't know if that's because of the Sharks or that's how he's going to be. They also have a guy from, well, you guys know the state pretty well, but a big-time Class 2A power, Franklin, and his name's Bryson Washington, who's a true freshman running back. So they have some good young running backs. I think to have any chance at all in this game, it will be about ball control, trying to run the football. And it just, I just don't, right now, the quarterback does not look like he's ready for prime time. And maybe he will be, but, someone y'all know well, and sadly we lost him, Mike Leach, is who recruited Sawyer Robertson. And so he was really brought up in the air raid, had a great career at Lubbock Coronado High School, but this wide zone that Jeff Grimes is trying to run so far seems to be a rough fit for him. And so we'll see what he's able to produce this week. But right now, Bears thin at quarterback and missing probably their best running back.
Yeah, Matt, it's crazy. I know Bear fans would probably want Blake Shapen back as much as they do now. It's pretty crazy to think about that. But let's talk about Monterey Baldwin a little bit, because going into the season, he was the main attraction for this wide receiver core from our standpoint. And I don't think he's touched the ball in the last 2 weeks. Is that an injury situation, or like you mentioned, Sawyer Robinson is just struggling that much he can't even find those guys?
Well, he's touched it while dropping the ball. So you've had a couple of drops, and we don't exactly know what Monterey's going through right now, but some pretty rough body language at times out on the field. And let's just say, I think he's kind of at a crossroads with the Bears. I'm sure y'all seen this in Austin at times. You're like, uh-oh, whatever is going on here may result in a transfer portal at some point. I'm afraid that's where the Bears now. That doesn't mean he certainly has great speed. He's been a breakaway threat. He had a huge play even in that Sugar Bowl a couple years ago. He's capable. The guy I would say, though, to keep a closer eye on would be Ketron Jackson, the transfer from Arkansas. He has been able to be a deep threat, to make contested catches. And if they are to have any success in the passing game, he needs to have a big day. And then a guy named Hal Presley, who is also big body, doesn't mind going up and getting in traffic. He's a pretty good wide receiver. But Baldwin, is kind of a head scratcher at this point. Do I think he could be total breakaway threat? Absolutely. But he has not been in a great place lately. And coaching staff hasn't really addressed it. We're only allowed to talk. Dave Aranda is a one voice, kind of like old Bill Parcells used to be. Only one man talks during the season. And Dave is a fascinating character. It's not like we don't like hearing from Dave, but Dave's also, kind of a quirky, extremely introverted kind of guy. So I will say there are some times in a season you really would like to hear from some other folks. And for whatever reason, Aranda doesn't do it that way.
So do y'all get to talk to players?
They bring a few out during the week. But it's, again, you saw that situation at USC. It's a extremely controlled environment, and I don't know how Baylor would react to something similar. But let me just say, the old school Chip Browns of the world, I'd like to include myself in that, like going and hunting down coaches and getting players away from the facility. I mean, they frown so much on that. And again, that doesn't keep us from doing it, Chip, but it's a very sterile, like you can't even get the quarterback after games. It's like you just kind of wait to see who they bring out. And it might be someone who had like 3 carries in the game. And you're kind of looking around like, wait, Richard Reese carried the ball 4 times. Dawson Pendergrass was like, I don't know, he touched the ball 20 times in that game. And yeah, it's who you get. And they really actually have a great football SID. I really like him, but I honestly think it's, some of that stuff's coming from above him.
Hey, Matt, talk to us about these last 3 games, starting with Texas State. Obviously that was a shocker to everybody, but G.J. Kinney, his offense, man, very high-powered. Then Utah had the game won and a couple of turnovers late, end up losing. And then obviously y'all handled Long Island, but this season clearly hasn't gone what the Bears thought it would after going 6-4 last year. Break down those 3 games a little bit.
Well, I was hoping you guys wouldn't make me revisit Texas State. I've tried to put it behind me in life and move on from that episode. But yeah, that was an embarrassment. All hats off to GJ. His dad was a great linebacker at Baylor, Gary Joe Kinney back in the day. And so that was a little weird. And by the way, Gary Joe has another son who was on the Baylor sideline that day. So it was kind of an interesting day for the Kinney family. That's one thing, and I emailed or texted some of this to Chip, but I think a big issue for the Bears is, obviously the position that Petrie played a couple of years ago, the star position, they have these hybrid positions. They've got the jack linebacker, they got the star, which is like a safety, but a guy who comes up and rushes the passer sometimes. They're using a 7th-year player and named Bryson Jackson, who was a nice linebacker and a nice pass rusher. I mean, a good player. But now they put him back at safety, and G.J. Kinney walked into that stadium with like 50 new players on his team, right? All the portal. I mean, he's kind of like the mini Dion. And he just hunted for that guy the whole game. Like, okay, where's Bryson? Okay, we'll go there. And they just completely just out-schemed the Bears. Everything you could imagine. It was a perfect storm, an awful storm, because you had first time ever Matt Powledge was calling a defensive game. Baylor's new defensive coordinator. First time ever. And then all this new personnel they didn't know about, and then they just had some matchup nightmares, and they barely belonged on the field with Texas State. They got blown off the ball. Well, the next week, they actually looked good at the line of scrimmage and played great defense for much of the game. Now, Utah had their backup quarterbacks, and maybe it's a product of that. But still, they had beaten Florida. Utah's a good team, good program, top 11. And the Bears just couldn't finish. Same thing happened against TCU last year. They got the game. They're up. and they couldn't do it. Chip and I were talking recently about a time when Texas did that a couple of years ago. Texas is up 24-14 over the Bears, sitting in pretty good shape, and they could not close it out. The Bears win. The Bears are going to have a incredible season. And by the way, that was like the last game when Joey McGuire left the Baylor Bears and decided he would go be a part of the Texas Tech Red Raiders. And believe me, fellas, this is a fan base that if they need Tech to keep losing games, because if Tech is as good as their recruiting suggests they could be, and they start winning games, it's going to bring back all this. We could have hired Joey McGuire, but we hired the whispering coach from LSU. And again, I like Dave, but when things go south, fan bases don't want like the introvert or the guy who like never shows any emotion. Y'all have seen this for years. You want your coach getting mad or getting angry and sort of maybe being an extension of fire. Yeah, want a little fire. And I'm trying to think, almost kind of like this is more of a Chan Gailey Chip than a Parcells or somebody like that. This is a soft-spoken, and I'm sure Chan had his moments, but Dave. But now I'll say this: Aranda this week has had this real quiet. Well, quiet's the only thing he has, but there's this real confidence that he has in he kind of is hinting that thinks they could do something special Saturday. He knows what it means to the fan base. He's talked to the players about the history. Something tells me the players couldn't give two hoots about Grant Taft putting a worm in his mouth, back in the 1970s, or any of these speeches or any of the stuff that's happened. But they have gone over the history. And you saw our SIDs putting out tweets about how dominant the Bears have been over the past 75 meetings, if you count men's and women's basketball.
Boom. Boom. Well, Mosley, you also do the Doomsday podcast with Ed Werder, talking Cowboys.
Yes.
And these Dallas Cowboys have Cowboy Nation frothing at the mouth, thinking about something special. What do you like about the Cowboys, and there's not much not to like right now? Are you buying the Mike McCarthy, Dak love affair and just the magic carpet ride of those two?
Well, it's funny because the other day I asked Jerry about, did he watch Dion, and Jerry's eyes lit up, and even Jerry caught himself though, because he was like, where this is going if I start bragging on Dion. The thing about the Cowboys, and Chip, we've seen it for a lot of years now. It almost is like, in some ways, the regular season feels irrelevant, right? I mean, obviously they need to do well again, but if they win 12 games, this would be 3 straight seasons, 12 wins. In some ways, this has been a dominant football team going on 3 years now. But they're going to run into, in that divisional game, heaven forbid they ever make it to an NFC title game. That hadn't happened in 30 years. But they're going to run up against San Francisco at some point. And there's either a huge mental hurdle or something that's preventing that from happening, to the point where when analyzing that game last year in the playoffs, it's kind of like, well, shouldn't the Cowboys have this huge advantage with Dak over Brock Purdy? And yet you get to the game and it wasn't much of an advantage. In fact, it might have been a disadvantage. Dak played poorly. Now, against Tampa the week before, he played beautifully in the playoffs. So I don't want to dismiss that. But all this feels like, well, does any of it matter if they're going to get to the playoffs and do what they always do? Now, Micah Parsons continues to turn it up to the point where, I mean, he's the most dominant Cowboys defensive player since insert whoever you want. DeMarcus Ware, maybe you even go back to the old days, whether it be Haley, whoever. There's just there's no one out there right now that's wrecking offenses like Parsons is. And I just saw, like, in that recent game where they beat the Jets, and of course it was Zach Wilson, but he had 9 hurries, 2 sacks, and that left tackle was not. He's kind of had a guy who's had a nice long career, Dwayne Brown, and he was like so overmatched and didn't even belong on the field with Parsons. So the difference in this team, guys, from the Cowboys teams that we've covered in the past, is that they kind of come at you in waves. There's, like, this week, soon they'll have Donovan Wilson and Jordan Lewis will be back. Well, it's just like, honestly, they're replacing guys who are playing extremely well. So Donovan just happens to. So I guess all that to say, I don't know. This team does feel a little different. They're better than ever on defense. They obviously can score on the defensive side of the ball. This is going to come down to, is this McCarthy play calling and the so-called Texas Coast offense, is that going to get Dak to the next level? And by the way, early returns, Kellen Moore, 0-2, calling plays for the Chargers. Mike, 2-0. Now we'll see. They got another game against another bad quarterback in Arizona. So they finally will get a test coming up here, San Francisco, in a couple of weeks. That'll be a great test. But right now, we're planning our parade routes here in Dallas.
Hey, Matt, do you think this Cowboys defense is even more motivated for the fact that Dan Quinn came back and they know with how good he is, he might not be around for long unless if something very dramatic happens with the Cowboys and Mike McCarthy? But it seems like this defense is kind of relishing on the fact that their defensive coordinator, he doesn't have many years left with them.
I think Dan could have left a couple times now, and at least once for sure, and just kind of, it's very smart of him. I'm sure they've given him an enormous contract, and he's kind of like, you know what, the head coaching thing didn't go so great in Atlanta, kind of flamed out there, being known as maybe the best defensive coordinator in the game or the top 3 with the Cowboys, and never sort of getting the blame. When they lose in the playoffs, nobody's like, oh, it's Dan Quinn. Dan Quinn couldn't get it done. I think Dan is smart enough to realize he's got a pretty great thing going. But to your point, I do think Micah and the rest of the defense, there's a great, like, it reminds me, and they're different characters, absolutely. But, I really like Wade Phillips, even though I beat up on him like crazy when he was the head coach. But Wade had a great way as a defensive coordinator of, like, putting certain players in great matchups and just, like, elevating all their games. And Dan has that in a big way. And, he had that great run with Seattle, but this whole thing's different. He's not using all the same concepts that he did there. So I think he's now shown that he could be pretty great at 2 different stops as a defensive coach. So I guess all that to say, I don't think he's in a hurry to take one of these jobs. I mean, look at Sean Payton right now. Like, everybody thought, oh my gosh, they're going to be great now, or they'll at least be a playoff team because they got the great Sean Payton. Well, so far, not great. So I think Dan kind of is really relishing, to use your word, this opportunity and may not be in a rush to be a head coach.
Early thoughts on the Philadelphia Eagles, the team that everyone is picking, or most were picking, to win the NFC East after going to the Super Bowl last year.
I think there's always a bit of a hangover when you do what they did and make it as far as they did. I think that quarterback is just, it's like he and Dak are on the same level, I think, from intangibles and like leadership. I do think they're both like unbelievable leaders, the people you want up representing your team. But he just is a better player right now. And so that's the huge advantage that the Eagles have. Now, again, could Mike McCarthy, could this thing change? But I think the Eagles are going to sputter here for a little while. But I just think there's too much there. I'm thinking about the defense. They're always great on the D-line. They're hurting right now at linebacker. They're banged up on the defensive side. I think if you're going to get on the Eagles, you better get after them now. Like if the Cowboys, I don't have the schedule in front of me, but whatever that first matchup is, get them as early as you can, because I do think they're kind of sputtering around a little bit. They're banged up at wide receiver. They're banged up on defense. So still think, but I mean, so right now you might give the Cowboys the upper hand of the division, but it's going to be a dogfight between those two. And I don't buy into anything the Commanders are up to. And I don't buy into anything the Giants are up to. I mean, it's just, they're just kind of plodding along, and we have to somehow, we wake up every week and go, wait, why are they putting them in prime time? Like, why are we having to watch the Giants again? But I wouldn't put much stock in either of those two.
Mosley, when I look at Dak and I look at his numbers, his first 3 years in the league, he was really good. He ran. When things broke down in the pocket, he would run. Then as he, the next 3 years, when things broke down in the pocket, he'd keep hitching and force a bad throw instead of running. Looks like he's back to using his legs to making, if things break down, let me go get that 5, 6, 7 yards. When he does that, he's a different quarterback.
Yeah, he is. And one thing, you guys will like this, and sure, it's such huge football guys, but one thing they keep talking about, which I think there's some truth to this, is they've worked with his footwork like crazy to get his legs and everything and his feet pointed at exactly where he's going. And he just would he had some injuries, and in one of those seasons, he never quite got over one. And I don't know what you can blame all the interceptions on. Some of them were tipped and all. But what is also helping him is they finally seem to understand how to use some of their gadget-type players. Like, for years, they would just do weird stuff. Like Jordan Lewis, he seems fast. Let's run him on a jet sweep, one of our defensive players. Just weirdness like that. Now you've got Deuce Vaughn. Okay, here's a package for you. Turpin. Here's a little package for you. Dowdle. Okay, he does some nice things. Here's a little package for Dowdle. There's a lot more variation than what they were doing. And so I'm starting to kind of buy into, for years, Stephen Jones would have to come out and go, well, this year, we're going to try to get Pollard or whoever it was before that. You remember it was Lance, somebody from UNT, the little running back. We're going to try to get him a bunch of touches. Lance Dunbar, I think is his name. And they never did it. Well, now it's kind of like, you know what? They're gonna be at least one drive a game where Deuce is going to be heavily involved. Well, that's a great change of pace. You can't find him. He's fast. I mean, y'all have seen him with Texas playing against K-State these last few years. He's a way big time change of pace type guy. So I just think there's a lot more right now variety. And the only thing if you want to pick on something right now, they were not great in the red zone the other day. They were not scoring touchdowns. They kicked a bunch of field goals and kicked 5 field goals or something crazy. So we got to get that taken care of. Red zone offense and see where that is. But for the most part, everything's looking pretty good.
What's your prediction for Texas Baylor Saturday night?
I predict that you and I share an embrace in the press box. I'll stop by and see you guys because I want to see y'all in person. I would say probably, as much as it pains me to say, probably Texas I think the Bears will play some defense, much like what happened against Wyoming. Horns pull away late, probably, I think, 27-17. Bears cover. Or let's stick with that. 27-17. Longhorns, their final hurrah on the banks of the Brazos in Waco, and all the Horns fans take over George's and drink the night away.
Okay.
I mean, we can't say it any better than Israel Saucedo said. Lake Highlands finest. The one and only Matt Mosley.
Hey, Matt, before we let you go, were you surprised to see Art Briles on the sideline for the Sooners a couple of weeks ago?
You guys are breaking up. I can't. I'm losing you. Hey, Zay, we had such a nice goodbye, and you had to. Yeah,
I'm just asking. Forgot that covered them. Was that a shocker to you, like it was to us around here?
You know, I still check in with Art, and that was a really difficult deal for everybody. Obviously, what all happened, and just a horrible scandal. It does not shock me because he never loses. He's desperate to get back. And like part of him wanted to probably to be down on that field. He didn't want to cause all this controversy, obviously. But like there's still a little part of Art Briles who thinks somebody's going to give him a shot. And Grambling's tried, nobody. So I do think in that instance, maybe he thought it was late enough after the game. I don't know. I don't understand how anybody can see what happened with all that and not think it's going to blow up. But I still to this day think he almost thinks maybe he could get another shot. And I'll tell you something else that I don't know if I've ever mentioned this to Chip Zay. I think Art thought he had a shot to get back at Mississippi State and coach on that staff as an analyst or whatever. And when Mike Leach passed away, that any hope of that ended. And that really was something I've thought about this. And it's probably the only person in college football. There are probably two people that could take the backlash. One is Leach. One is Jerry Jones. And Jerry's not going to do it. And Mike, sadly, we've lost him. So kind of an interesting nugget there. But Art, it's extremely, he's at the game and there's an opportunity to be down on the field. I didn't go crazy on the story. I had colleagues that thought, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is horrible. Fire his son-in-law, all that. I thought that was a little much. But he's got to understand that anything he does, even if they had caught a shot of him in his jersey up in the stands, somebody would have tried to make a huge deal out of it. Okay. But on the field, yes, it was going to, if anybody that caught a picture of that, it was going to turn into a big thing. And by the way,
what I've never understood about Art is if he would have just said, I'm horrified.
Yeah.
What happened here. I have a daughter. I can't believe this happened on my watch. I'm going to do everything I can to try to, he just never stepped up and fell on the sword. And I get it. There were other people involved in that scandal that were higher than him, who were more responsible for it than him. And I'm sure he knows that and feels that, but he's still got to come out and say, I can't believe this happened. I'm mortified. I'm so sorry, And
I think he thought he did that on one of those Rinaldi. They did an interview with him. I think I'm trying to remember all that in 2000. After it happened, and I think he thought he did. But like you're right about what you said at first. He still thinks he was wronged by Baylor, and that he truly didn't. He might have admitted that he could have done better, but he doesn't. He thinks he was the scapegoat,
and he was.
Even now,
but
and yeah,
he's got to. If he wants to coach again, and he's a great coach, If he wants
Well,
to coach again, he's got to.
Texas. That's one of those. History could have been so different, and who knows? I don't know what would have happened at University of Texas under his watch. But he would have taken that job in 2000. What was that? 12 or 13, 14. When Charlie got hired.
Yeah.
He would have taken that job, and Baylor was just begging him to stay and Baylor went out there to a bowl game in Arizona and wasn't even focused and got beat by UCF because everybody was scared Art was going to leave, and he ends up staying. But, I mean, think about how much history would have been different there. There were a bunch of UT people, I'm sure, that wanted Art, and Art was going to take that job, and for whatever reason, they went another direction. And, the rest is history.
Steve Patterson offered the job to Jim Mora, interviewed James Franklin, and hired Charlie Strong. So those were the dark days for the Texas Longhorns, my friend. All right, we know you got a show to get ready for. We'll let you get after it, Mosley. Great conversation. Let's do it again soon.
Okay, guys, good to be streaming with you, and thanks to whoever. I like when that thing comes across and I see comments and all. I wish we had that technology in Waco, but we'll hopefully get that someday.
There he is, Lake Highlands' finest, Matt
yes,
Mosley.
I love that guy. All right.
Thanks,
All
man.
my